Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Introduction to Philosophy again. So this week, in this video, I'm going to spend some time talking about this particular novel, Kafka's Metamorphosis, and I'm going to say a few things about the implications that this novel has for theories of the self and personal identity, which is the topic that we are covering this week in class. So. First let me say that as you know, you have been assigned to read this novel for this week and the next, and it's about 40 pages, not a very long novel. It's a very interesting and rich novel. So please take the time to read it and enjoy it if you haven't already done so. So as I said, this is one of the classics of existentialist literature. It's a very rich novel, even though it's very short, and a lot of things can be said about it. But for today, I'm just going to restrict myself to talking about the implications that this story has for our notions of self and personal identity, and maybe say a few things about the notion of alienation as well. All right. So let me begin by saying a few things about what the novel is about. Let me just summarize the plot very briefly in a nutshell. Actually, I'm going to start by reading to you the first line of the novel, which is actually very famous. So the first line reads: "One morning, when Gregor Samsa awoke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin." So the first line of the story pretty much already gives you the main premise, which is that this guy, Gregor, who is a traveling salesman, wakes up one morning and finds himself mysteriously transformed into a horrible vermin or insect. There is no explanation for how or why this happened. This is not a science fiction. This is not a science fiction novel, so he's not suffering from some terrible disease or anything like that, which caused him to slowly become an insect. No, none of that. Nothing of that sort. This basically the story just takes as a given that he is being transformed into an insect, and then he has to really struggle with who he is. Now that he finds himself having the body of an insect. So, which actually is the question that I want to explore through this story, which is the question of what is the self? What makes me me? So, let me start with let me just start with giving you a very brief summary of the novel, just so we have it out of the way. So, in the first part of the novel, Gregor awakes to find himself transformed into an insect, but I think he still believes that it is just a temporary condition. He thinks that it is either a hallucination or some kind of fluke of nature, and that he thinks that he's going to be transformed back into a human being eventually. So he still tries to get to work. He's still worrying about whether he's going to get to work on time, whether he's going to miss the train. He still tries his best to speak to the chief clerk from his office who comes to visit him, even though he couldn't make himself understood. And then in the second part of the novel, he starts to sink in, the fact starts to sink in that this condition is permanent. And along with the permanence of this condition, certain permanent changes starts happening to his body as well. He finds that he has the body of a bug, so he can't stand on 2 feet. He has to crawl around. He feels most comfortable when hanging from the ceiling. He finds that he doesn't enjoy the foods that he used to enjoy anymore. He doesn't enjoy drinking milk anymore. And then in the third part of the story, so in the second part, along with the realization that he is permanently a bug, there is also this sense of pain and anguish at not being able to be a part of his family anymore. His family doesn't recognize him. His family couldn't communicate with him. So there is this great pain and anguish. And then in the third part of the novel, he comes to terms with the fact that he is a bug and is therefore a burden to his family, and therefore it is best that he just dies and disappears so as to prevent himself from being a further burden to his family. And then after having this realization, shortly after having this realization, he dies. Okay, so that's basically the story in a nutshell. Now I want to come back to talking about the implications of this story for our notions of, for our views of self. Now remember that in this other video that I posted for this week, in which I talk about Locke's notion of view of personal identity, you might remember that for John Locke, what makes me, what makes this self that I have myself is the continuity of memory. I am who I am because I have the same memories as I had 5 minutes ago, 10 days ago, and 10 years ago. And it is this continuity of consciousness, this continuity of memory that makes me me, that makes the self the self. I think we can see this novel, The Metamorphosis, as questioning this assumption, as turning this assumption on its head. Because, I mean, if you look at Gregor, he obviously still remembers being a human being. He remembers everything that he did when he was still human. But is he the same self? I mean, does he still have the same self? Is he still the same person? Notice that one of the first things that he noticed that has changed is that he no longer has the ability to communicate with his family. He tries to speak, but all that would come out is a bunch of hisses and chirps and all these insect sounds. So that gives us a sense that who you are is not just constituted by what memories you have or what is in your mind. It is also constituted by the connections that you have with other people, by the ability that you have to constantly communicate with other people. And because Gregor wasn't able to, communicate with his family and with people around him anymore, he realizes that that actually has that drastically changes his sense of who he is. He might choose to think that he's still human, but you can't really be human if you're unable to have communications with other human beings. So there's this. So I think one of the things this novel might be trying to suggest is that who we are is not just what is in our mind, but also is also constituted by our connections and our ability to communicate with other people. So the idea is that self isn't just a so John Locke actually wants us to believe that self is a self-contained concept. Who you are is just contained by what memories you have and what's in your mind. But Kafka in Metamorphosis wants to show that actually self is a relational concept. Who we are is defined by our relations with people around us, and these relations are only possible if we can constantly connect and communicate with us. So if you want to think of a slogan for this, remember that Descartes said that I think, therefore I am. It seems that for Kafka, it would be more like I communicate with others, therefore I am. And if I don't communicate, or if I can't communicate with others, then I cease. There's a very important sense in which I cease to be myself. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that is very closely related to this is this. The reason why Gregor wasn't able to communicate with others is because he no longer has the body that is able to make those human sounds. He now has an insect body and is only capable of making chirps and hisses, which also suggests that ultimately, if who you are is determined by your connections and communications with people, and your ability to communicate with people is in turn determined by what kind of body you have, it seems then that who you are is defined very much, if not fully, by what kind of body you have. The kind of body you have, affects your ability to connect with other people, which means that there's a very real sense in which self is a very embodied concept. So you can't say that it doesn't really matter what body you have, so long as you have memories, because it seems, if this story means anything, it seems that what kind of body you have really matters. Okay, but then there's another complication here. You can see that throughout the entire novel, even though Gregor isn't able to communicate with his family members, even though he has a body of a bug, he still very much identifies himself as a human being. he still has those memories. He still thinks about what his family is going through and feeling now that they no longer have his income. So he still cares very much for his family and still identifies himself very much as as a human being who is a member of the family. So it seems that things are more complicated than what I just suggested, because it seems that although your body and your ability to communicate is a big part of who you are, it is not all that you are. It seems that your memories, what is in your mind, is also a part of who you are. Actually, it almost seems like there is a kind of tension between the two. Your sense of self is not defined fully by your body. So your body pulls in one direction when it comes to defining yourself. But then again, it is also not defined fully by your memories or what is in your mind and what you identify with. Even though, again, it is part of it, part of who you are. So it's like there's this sort of tension. There's your body on the one hand and the memory on the other hand, and they're pulling in different directions. And somehow this pulling creates this tension that gives you a sense of who you are. So what does Kafka really think? That is the question. What does he really think? Does he think that there is a definitive answer as to what makes you who you are? What accounts for your sense of self? I'm not sure if he has an answer. And since this is a novel, he is not required to give us an answer because he's not writing a philosophical essay. But I think that sometimes reading novels like this is useful because we can use, as you can see, we can use this novel as a vehicle to help us to explore what is going on in our thinking about what makes us us. So, and one last thing before I end this video is this. One more thing that is featured in this novel is the theme of alienation. The idea that you are always forever separated from other people. Now, when Gregor becomes an insect, when he wakes up to find himself an insect, he realizes that he's unable to communicate with others. He's therefore in a very physical sense separated from other people. But if you think about what's going on, you will realize that actually maybe the alienation or the separation has happened even before he became an insect. Because notice that all the thoughts that are going through his mind are always about what he can do for his family, or what is his family going to be like now that he's not providing an income for them anymore. So there's always this question of what does he really want for himself. I mean, he has some big dreams of maybe setting up his own business in the future or something like that, but that was never really clear. Whereas what was clear is his desire to provide for his family, to help his sister to go to a music school and things like that. So again, the idea is that maybe the separation from his sense of who he is, his not knowing who he himself is apart from his roles within the family, that is something that may already have happened even before he became an insect. So the alienation is already happening. The separation had already happened before he became an insect, and his becoming an insect is just a very physical and concrete manifestation of the alienation that he feels inside of himself. So this theme of alienation and separation from our sense of who we are, or who we really are, if there is such a thing, this theme of alienation is something that we are going to explore in more detail as we progress throughout the semester. So yeah, keep all this in mind and stay tuned for further videos. Thank you.